us this evening.
There's no snow where I am.
No.
No snow where I am.
No.
We've got 6
There's no where I am.
We have 5 inches.
Yeah.
Wow.
Really?
Wow.
5? Oh gosh.
You live in proper snow country.
Just, you know, we're streaming now on YouTube.
Well, to anyone that's joining us on YouTube, we're just talking about how much snow we've got. So,
Which for some of us is none at all.
Yeah.
and the maximum so far seems to be 5 inches. So, quite a variety.
Very good. Yeah.
It's Jeff
Where was the 5 inches of snow?
Yeah, turn down a bit. Yeah.
Barnard Castle direction, was it, Penny?
Yeah, it's Barnard Castle in town. I expect up the dale there's more.
Don't know where that would work.
There was more snow after I measured it, but I've ignored it since.
Yeah, it might work actually. That yeah.
No snow in Aberdeen at the moment.
No, I was just going to turn the light down a bit during rather than doing that. You know, just on the dimmer thing. Yeah, just rather than
Adrian,
That's
if you
fine.
don't know where Scunthorpe is, I'm sure you know where Barnard Castle is now. It's been in the past.
I regularly go there for an eye checkup.
Adrian, do you know that one of the local breweries has produced a beer called Barnard Castle Eye Test?
Really?
Yeah, no one will ever
Welcome, Roy.
Oh, well, then,
Just give a minute or two more for folk who are
What's
arriving.
happened to Dorothy? She's disappeared. But she has lots
I've
of
just
them there.
lost something on my screen and I can't see you at all. What might I have pressed?
Hey!
I've lost you all.
We've lost her.
Here you are. You're back.
I
Oh,
can hear
very
you,
good,
but
yeah.
I can't see anything.
Edwin, I'm here, only I'm eating my tea.
Oh,
Well, what's
we've had our
your snow like, Dorothy?
Just about 2 or 3 inches.
We've got more than you then. I thought you would have a lot being up there.
Judy, if you go to the bottom of your screen,
Yes.
you should find the left-hand corner, it is on mine, a little camera.
Oh, yes, I think.
Try clicking on that.
sorry.
Meet now. Join a meeting.
Something is.
No, I'll try that. Ooh.
Oh, very good. Yeah. Judy.
Are you okay now, Judy? Can you see us?
No.
So I don't think it's your camera because we can see you.
Try share screen.
Right, I've done something on the.
If you go to the top right-hand corner,
Yes.
click the little symbol there, it will open a drop-down which gives you the choice of speaker view or gallery view. If you click speaker view, you should get us back.
That's what I think we're on. We're on.
That's what we're on.
We're on gallery view now. Go back to
Judy,
that.
what have you actually got on the screen? Have you got anything of Zoom?
I've got a dark grey thing that says ready for your meeting, as if I haven't been.
Right. If you
I'd leave and rejoin.
if you go to
That's a good idea.
that might be the easiest, to be honest.
Oh, okay. Right. Okay. I'll go away and come back. I'm sorry.
We'll see you in a moment.
We'll wait for you.
Just while we're waiting for.
Right. I can see you, Trish.
Good. Excellent.
Sorry.
We've been able to see you, so it was something on your screen that was the problem. So it is lovely to see everybody back this week. We've got almost 50 screens on, which means we've got certainly more than 50 people because some of us are sharing. So wonderful to see you back again this evening. And of course, to welcome Adrian back to lead us again as we look into the second half of Mark's Gospel. Just a reminder to encourage you, if you can, to use the rename function so that your name is on the screen if it isn't already, so we can see who's speaking and invite people to raise questions or contribute to the conversation later on. You can do that by clicking on your picture or the 3 dots to the top right of your picture usually, or by your name in the participants list where there are options. In between speaking, if you'd like to stay on mute, which is usually in the bottom left of the screen if you're on a laptop, or in the by tapping on the screen if you're on an iPad or something like that, that enables us all just to hear the person who's speaking most clearly. Most of the time that's Adrian, but from time to time we all contribute. So it is lovely to see you. Very good to welcome James, who's doing our technical things this evening, and good to see Adrian back to lead us. Adrian, will I hand over to you now, or is there anything else that you would like me to say at this stage?
No, I think you're going to hand over to me now.
Thank you.
Welcome, everyone. It's good to be back. It feels yeah, just nice, and I'm looking forward to us journeying through the second half, which is a little bit different and quite exciting. Let me get back into the rhythm of doing some of this stuff, like sharing screen with you. Okay. So this is the journey that we're having, journey through Mark's Gospel. Mark, of course, is just a single voice among many in the New Testament. Luke and Matthew looked at what Mark had done. They thought, this is great, but we can do it better, and they revised it. But of course, Mark is still the original, and as such, it stands alone and on its own gives us a complete account of the good news of Jesus Christ. We've got a good foundation for understanding what Mark is saying. And so after just a brief revision, we're going to keep moving through the text, looking at some stories a little more closely and placing particular emphasis on those passages that come up in the lectionary. A reminder that there will be an online coffee group tomorrow at noon, and we'll put the details of that into the chat later. As always, I'll probably end up talking a whole lot, but actually I appreciate the interaction. So if you've got questions, ask them. If you want to put something into the chat, you want to comment in the chat, then that's great. I'm going to ask questions. When I ask questions, I am wanting you to talk to me. So share your insights and ask your questions, and perhaps be willing to take, I don't know, as an answer to some of them. Let's open with a word of prayer. God of love, God for all, we thank you for your word, and we thank you for the opportunity to turn aside from everything else and just to spend some time focusing on your message, your gospel, on the good news that is there for us. So help us to let go of all that holds us back and shake us up with the good news of Jesus and show us the way. For we ask it in his name. Amen. So this is not a new journey that we're on. We've started before, and we agreed that there are a couple of crucial keys to understanding any piece of text. What might those be? Just call them out. Just unmute and call out. What are the key things that we need to understand a piece of text? Say again?
Context.
Context. Context is a big one. We've got to understand where and how it happened. We've got to understand the context. What kind of things is included in that word context? Again, just call them out.
Genre. Yeah.
Geography.
Situation.
Political situation. History. Culture. Language. All those sort of things, all just fit together into this wonderful package of the things around us that we don't really notice because that's just the way they are, and that forms the context. But if we're going to understand what a text is saying, we need to understand the context into which that text was spoken or written, or in which it was understood. The other thing is, someone called it out, is genre, which is the type of writing that it is. And particularly with gospel, it's important that we understand that it's not just biography, that it's not just history. We must learn to ask. We must learn to ask the right kind of questions. So if it was history, we would be asking questions like, how did this happen? When did this happen? That sort of thing. But because it's gospel writing, we need to be asking, what does it mean? It's not biography, it's not history. What included in that is the idea that everything that we need to know, the writer will have included in the story. We don't need to go and look at Matthew's account. We don't need to go and look at Luke's account to understand the story, because Mark has written something that stands on its own. And he's been very careful about the words that he's used. He's been very careful about what he has included and what he has excluded. But with one exception, everything that we need to know is included in the story. What is that one exception? Anyone? What doesn't the writer include in the story?
Birth of Christ.
No. Well, yes, but less specific than that. He doesn't include the things that that he knows the first readers will know. Okay? So the things of context that he can take for granted about the culture, about the history, those sort of things, he doesn't include in the story. He doesn't make a point of telling you those. He assumes you as reader will know those. So sometimes we're at a bit of a disadvantage because we're reading it 18, 1900 years later. We don't know all those things. So we've got to put our mind back into the right situation and try and understand it then and there. Over and again, you're going to hear me say the key question to ask any piece of gospel writing is, what does it mean? What does it mean for us as disciples? What does it mean of our understanding of God, of our understanding of Jesus? What does this piece of text mean for us? There's a third key that is perhaps less important, but it's really important in Mark's gospel, and that is the geography of Jesus' life. So all of Jesus' life happened on the map that is cut off a little bit at the bottom in front of you. Okay, here, can you see the mouse pointer? Not. Okay, so on the left is the Mediterranean Sea. To the east, there in white is Palestine, and bordered on the right by on the eastern side by the Jordan River. To the top of the Jordan River, there's the Sea of Galilee. To the bottom, there's the Dead Sea. And really the important piece of geography, or the two important pieces of geography that we need to understand, is that everything in Mark's stylized geography, everything that is that yellowish desert sandish color is kind of Gentile territory, and everything that is the white is kind of Jewish territory. That's the style of Mark's geography. Clearly in the day, it wasn't as hard a border as all of that. And then to note that Galilee is up in that top area there by the Sea of Galilee, it's marked, and Jerusalem is quite a way down other side of Samaria, sort of just west of the top end of the Sea of the Dead Sea.
Adrian, could you just go back to the genre slide for a moment? There's a request
Sure.
in the chat there. Thank you.
Oh yeah, will you read it to me?
First slide said genre determines, and it went. Any chance of putting it up again?
Oh, genre determines the appropriate response. So when we understand what type of writing something is, we can understand what we can do with it. If we are to read, an encyclopedia, for instance, and pick up an encyclopedia, we can't critique it for not having a good storyline. If we're to pick up a fairy tale, we aren't going to be questioning the historicity of it. we've got to ask different questions of different genres. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm. Thank you.
Fourth big key, and we didn't focus that much on it, and I'm not going to focus too much on it now, but in terms of understanding New Testament Palestine and the first century Israel, is the question of honor and shame. You'll see I've corrected the spelling. Honor and shame were the biggest social currencies of the time. It determined who you were, what power you had, who you could speak to, who you couldn't speak to, what you could do, what you couldn't do, all that sort of thing. It was the currency that determined your place in society. I use the word currency intentionally there to try and understand how important it was in terms of social mobility and opportunity and that sort of thing. Is that okay? So what I'm going to ask, James if he wouldn't mind just moving us quickly, everyone, into a breakout group. And in that breakout group, I just want you to share or to type into the chat what you have learned about discipleship, Jesus, Mark's gospel, just a brainstorm session. Make sure everyone gets to talk, gets an opportunity to share some of what they've learned, and just throw all those thoughts into a pile. You don't have to talk them through. Just throw them all into a pile so that we just bring them to mind again. Is that okay?
Adrian, how long would you like them in breakout rooms for?
I would think about after 8 minutes, we'll give you a 2-minute warning. How's that?
Okay, so you'll have...
Now, let's say after 5 minutes, we'll give you a 2-minute warning. So you'll have 7 minutes in total.
Yeah. So you get... So you should be invited to the rooms now. So click on join rooms and you'll have 5 minutes in the room, and then you'll have a 2-minute warning once to show the rooms are closing.
We are still live streaming.
Yeah. Are you there, Jim? Jim, are you there? I'll just pop Jim in the waiting room for now.
Okay.
There we go. So,
James, are you, as you watch the live stream now, are you able to see the comments below the?
Yeah. So there's
so if there are questions there, would you just feed them into the discussion?
Absolutely. Yeah. There's comments on. If there's anything comes up on the live stream, and then Trisha's. Like there was a comment from Sharon about the genre. Yeah. So yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. So
have we got people on live stream at the moment, James?
Yeah, there's a couple on live stream at the moment, but no comments. If you're on live streaming and you want to leave a comment, you're very welcome to, and we'll pick it up and
it would be nice if you just told us where you were streaming from as well.
Oh yeah.
That would be good to see.
Yeah, and I'll pass that on. So what?
Ask a question or something.
yeah. What would have Mark taken for granted that people would have known that we, you know what I mean?
Right. So some of the conversations about history and geography in particular that people would have known when we had the conversation about the Decapolis, you would have taken for granted that people had an understanding of some of the history of the Decapolis. When it comes to some of the conversations about groups of people in society, like the Pharisees and the Sadducees, he doesn't feel a need to explain that this is what Sadducees did, or this is how Pharisees were viewed in society, or that sort of thing. What else might be examples? Some of the simple just geography of going down to to Jericho and up to Jerusalem and things like that. He just sort of puts that in. But perhaps some of the things that we've spoken about at other times as well, and I didn't say this earlier on, but the feeling that that people understood enough of, had the Old Testament close enough in their minds that he could make Old Testament references without having to explain exactly what he was referring to. So probably later tonight, chapter 9, verse 2, he says that after 6 days, they went up the mountain. And it's very, in his mind, it's a very clear reference to Moses going up the mountain when he began to fetch the law. And he wants you to bring that story to mind and hold that story in mind as you hear the story of the Transfiguration. And he uses a lot of Old Testament references kind of in that way. When the people are assembled on one of the occasions for the one of the feeding miracles, he talks about them sitting down on the green grass. Now, I don't know, I suppose there must have been some green grass in Palestine, but I mean, if you look at it, it looks more like desert. But it's more about bringing to mind a reference to Psalm, help me, the Lord's my shepherd, 23, thank you. It's embarrassing. And bringing that passage to mind, so that at the same time he might bring to mind some of Ezekiel's earlier comments about the people being like shepherds without a sheep and that sort of thing. Yeah.
Something else that interests me is, you're saying about, so you've got Palestine, which is the white bit on your map, and Samaria is part of Palestine, but Jews and the Samaritans, they didn't get on, did they? Because you got the parable of the Good Samaritan when he was like held up as an example of loving your neighbor.
Yes. Yeah. So the Samaritans were of the same stock as the Jews. I think I'm just stopping short of saying they were Jews as well, but they held up that the right place to worship their God, Yahweh, was not on the mountain in Jerusalem, but on the mountain in Samaria. And that was one of the big issues of contention between them. So it wasn't like they were sworn arch enemies who didn't know each other and had no connections. It was more like this massive family feud, which had resulted in, half the family never coming for Christmas dinner and the other half, retaliating over the moon. So, I mean, even as you look at that map, if you were in Galilee and you wanted to travel to Jerusalem, the recognized route was not the route that Jesus took through Samaria, John chapter 4, but actually to travel around Samaria. So travel east to the River Jordan, travel south along the Jordan Valley. I mean, it was probably a decent route as well, and the river and all of that. But to make that roundabout route, which among other things meant you didn't have to go through Samaria.
Just shutting in about 20 seconds time. I've seen people are coming back already. So. Oh, Barbara Lanyon's on the live stream, and she said I was just about to ask that. So I'll just in the loop. So there we are.
Okay. Barbara, tell us where you're from.
She's from the northeast.
Okay.
Okay, all the rooms are all back now. Everybody's back now, Adrian.
Thank you. So I'm going to start where we finished, and that might help just bring a few people who are with us who weren't here for the first half on board. But it's not just for that. It's to also just to help us again, just to connect with where we were in the story. So we're going to start reading. at Mark chapter 8 and verse 22.
8:22.
8:22. You're going to be familiar with the story. We have spoken about it before. Jesus and the disciples, came to Bethsaida, and some people brought a blind man to Jesus and begged him to touch him. Jesus took the blind man by the hand and led him out of the village. And when he had put saliva on his eyes and laid his hands on him, he asked him, "Can you see anything?" And the man looked up and said, "I can see people, but they look like trees walking." Then Jesus laid his hands on his eyes again, and he looked intently, and his sight was restored, and he saw everything clearly. And Jesus sent him away to his home, saying, "Do not even go into the village." What do we see? What do we hear? What do we remember?
Is it the lack of faith of the man that was almost an imperfect miracle, literally? Was it the faith of the man or something else?
Not the faith of the man, something else?
Well, the people brought the man to Jesus.
Yeah, that was interesting. They brought the man to Jesus. Yeah. So, I mean, we see that a number of times in Mark's gospel, that there's this external agency. It's not just about people coming to Jesus. Often it's about people bringing people to Jesus. Yeah. There's a number of stories like that. But
I think you talked about the first conversion, that conversion isn't just once, it's sort of every day.
Right. So there's a sense in which it's not just about a one-off conversion, and after that we know everything and we be everything and we do everything and everything is perfect. Actually, there's something that is this process of discipleship that we need to make a journey of this with Jesus. And this is kind of in this story, this is where the disciples are. They're following Jesus, they're following him at a distance. They like what he says, but they don't always get it, okay? Or in the image of this story, here's this man, he has his eyes opened, he sees differently. Things have changed. He sees when he didn't see before, but he hasn't had that complete change of heart that enables him to see people for who they are. At this point, he's still seeing people as things. You can see them moving around, but they still look like things. And things are things that we use. Things are things that are supposed to be convenient or easy or whatever. And he's unable at that point, until Jesus opens his eyes again, to make the move to seeing and valuing people for who they really are. Does that make a bit of sense? Can we see that in the story? So actually the challenge to us, along with the disciples, is at this halfway point in the story, to acknowledge that some of what Jesus has said and some of this journey along the way and through the wilderness has been difficult. We've got these questions, and we see, but we're not exactly sure, and we hear, but we're not sure that we understand. And actually some of the parts that we understand very clearly, we're not so sure we want to know about. And the disciples with us are in this place where we're needing to push on and to move forward. And if the first half of the journey was about the way through the wilderness, the second half of the story becomes the way to Jerusalem. No more sea journeys. The journey is now from the margins of Palestine to the very center of power that is in Jerusalem. Starting in the extreme north in Caesarea Philippi, Jesus works his way south through Galilee and into Judea. The second part of the story is also very much the way of the cross. It is a journey towards the cross, and it's a journey of a specific kind of community and a specific kind of social and political practice that brings the disciples and us into questions about this paradox of power, about needing to lose power in order to gain power, needing to give up things in order to gain them. And there we are with this man in just not sure if our eyes are open and we're seeing this quite right, because parts of it doesn't quite make sense when Jesus says we cannot save our lives by trying to save them. We have to lose them and give them up in order to save them. That the first have to be last and the last have to be first, and to be least is to be great, and to be all those kind of things. And so as a result, there's this conflict that grows in Jesus' community. As much as we're going to recognize there's a conflict and uncertainty growing within us at the same time. And this part is teaching and it's dialogue and instruction, and it's all about a non-violent way of life. And the more the disciples hear this, the more their resistance to it grows. And all through it, these visions of this image of blindness and seeing, of deafness and hearing, of making a move from life to death and back to life again. So that's the journey that we're on. Any questions? Can we move on? Can we read? So before we do that, let me share 2 bits of background, 2 things that Mark feels you should know. He doesn't really have to explain them to, and perhaps we really do need them explained to us. Thanks, Mark. The first is this Jewish idea of Messiah. The Messiah was what Jewish people were hoping for. As this long oppressed people, they were hoping that one day this leader would come who would take up the fight and establish independence for Israel all over again. And we would live under the house of David, and the Romans would be chased all the way back to Rome. And the image that they have is very much of a military leader who is organizing a military insurrection. It's very much a politically loaded term, Messiah, or Christos in the Greek. And it portrays not just a great prophet, but a royal military figure who will restore the political fortunes of Israel. That makes sense? Okay. It's not Messiah as we want to spiritualize it and understand it. This is Messiah riding into town on a white horse, chasing the baddies out of town. It's more that image. That's superior violence. The revolution is at hand, says Peter. Eh? By contrast, the language that Jesus uses in response that we will hear is that Jesus talks about the Son of Man. Now, the Son of Man was really an Old Testament imagery. Let me start somewhere else. We spoke about this image of son of, not denoting someone who was genetically connected to someone and of a certain gender, but rather someone who was just like someone. So the Son of God would be someone who was just like God. The Son of Man is someone who is the fullness of what it means to be a person. This is someone who is full to overflowing with humanity. And the image comes initially from Daniel chapter 7. Daniel 7 is written in a type of writing called a genre called apocalyptic writing. And in it he sees these 4 beasts that are huge wild animals, probably representing the nations around Israel at the time. And there's a lion and there's a bear, and I forget what the others are. My eye doesn't fall on straight away. And he has this vision of these 4 animals just ripping each other apart the whole time. It's just amazing violence, and they're just destroying each other as they do it. And as they destroy each other, so everyone else around them is being destroyed at the same time. And into the midst of that, in the midst of all that violence, when it finally seems that the forces and the powers of this world have overcome everything, it's interesting, he says, he looked again. And when he looked again, he saw someone who was like a son of man, the fully human one, the human one. Okay, and it's that deliberate contrast between the violence of the beasts that are tearing each other apart and this image of peace that comes in this one who understands what it means to be fully human. As opposed to the brutality of government, here is someone who embodies humanity. As opposed to the brutality of war, here is someone who embodies non-violence and peace, the Son of Man. Isaiah has a similar vision, different time or whatever, and Isaiah describes his vision in terms of, help me, what's the similar vision that we have in Isaiah? The one who is so peace-loving and gentle, the suffering servant, yeah. So peace-loving and gentle, he won't even snap off a reed that is bruised. So peace-loving and gentle that even when the flame is flickering, he won't just snuff it out. Okay? It's the same sort of image. So as we listen to this passage, and hopefully as you listen to it again, because I know you've heard it many times before, but notice the distinction between Messiah, which is not necessarily a positive image, and Son of Man. Okay. Let's put it back up there. Can you see that? You can't see that, can you?
Not yet.
No, sorry, I've just lost myself between screens. Oh, there we go. Thank you. So Jesus went on with his disciples to the villages of Caesarea Philippi. And on his way, he asked his disciples, "Who do the people say that I am?" And they answered him, "John the Baptist. And others say Elijah, and still others, one of the prophets." And he asked them, "But who do you say that I am?" And Peter answered him, "You are the Messiah." And he sternly ordered them not to tell anyone about him. And then he began to teach them that the Son of Man must undergo great suffering and be rejected by the elders, the chief priests, and the scribes, and be killed, and after 3 days rise again. He said all this quite openly, and Peter took him aside and began to rebuke him. But turning and looking at his disciples, he rebuked Peter and said, "Get behind me, Satan, for you are setting your mind not on divine things, but on human things." And he called the crowd with his disciples and said to them, "If any want to become my followers, let them deny themselves and take up their cross and follow me. For those who want to save their life will lose it, and those who lose their life for my sake and for the sake of the gospel will save it. For what will it profit them to gain the whole world and forfeit their life? Indeed, what can they give in return for their life? Those who are ashamed of me and of my words in this adulterous and sinful generation, of them the Son of Man will also be ashamed when he comes in the glory of his Father with the holy angels." And he said to them, "Truly I tell you, there are some standing here who will not taste death until they see that the kingdom of God has come with power." So my usual questions to you: what do you see? What do you hear? What does it sound like Mark is saying? The big question, what does it mean?
It means that the disciples had a completely different understanding of Jesus than he did himself.
Right, spot on. Someone unpack for us, or John unpack for us, what are those differences?
Well, when Peter calls him the Messiah and Jesus talks about his sufferings, Peter takes issue with him and says, no, it's not going to be like that. And Jesus said, oh, yes, it is.
Okay, right. Why does Peter think it's not going to be like that? Why does Peter think Jesus isn't going to suffer?
They're still waiting for the Messiah because he is a Jew and probably steeped in the Jewish ideas.
Right. And so when the Messiah arrives, he's going to be the next best, the next big thing. He's going to be enthroned and he's going to be top dog in the country. That's not suffering. That's wearing fine robes and eating fine food. And that's what Peter's understanding of Messiah is leading to.
This is about honor and shame, isn't it?
It is about honor and shame. Quite right, Jenny. Yeah. So by contrast, what is the picture that Jesus paints? It says, because effectively Jesus is saying to Peter, no, I mean, until you understand the difference between Messiah and Son of Man, there's a verse there that's really odd. If you think Messiah is the spiritual Messiah who's going to save all of us in the world from our sins, then actually it's very odd, especially now with our church growth obsession, that the very next thing that Jesus says to Peter is, Peter and the disciples, you don't tell anyone about me.
Yeah.
If you think I'm the Messiah, you got some learning to do, just keep quiet for now. Whereas we might have been expecting him to say, oh, that's fantastic. You go out and tell everyone, bring in the crowds. But instead he's saying, you've misunderstood so badly for now. Keep quiet. Was it Joe who was going to say something?
Sorry, I was just wondering. So in the previous verses, for example, in verse 29, Peter replied, you are the Messiah. And then, of course, Jesus is obviously expecting that Jesus is going to be this warmongering type, rise up. And then, of course, Jesus corrects him. I'm just wondering how disappointed Peter might have been feeling. Obviously, he's
you can empathize with him a bit. I mean, he does seem to put his foot in his mouth a number of times, and I mean, he doesn't. I mean, it goes from bad to worse, because Jesus doesn't just say to him, no, don't tell anyone about me. 2 verses later, Jesus is saying to Peter, get behind me, Satan. I mean, gosh, he's having a bad day. Why? I mean, why? I mean, that's exceptionally strong language.
I always tend to take that one, that this is actually a real temptation for Jesus. That out of those words of Peter, this is a real distraction. And so that's why I'm saying get behind me, Satan, because it's not so much an attack on Peter, it is an attack on Satan.
Brilliant. So I just couldn't pick up who said that, but I mean, that's spot on. That's exactly right. I mean, this is in Mark's gospel, this is one of those big temptation moments for this man Jesus. And remember, we've said we've got to understand him as a man, as a person. And here he stands at this massive crossroad along with his disciples, and there's this option to go Messiah, great leader, respected person kind of way on the one path, and on the other path, rejection by everyone and crucifixion. It's a huge moment of temptation for Jesus. That's exactly what it is. And Peter's the one who's saying, he's kind of voicing what might be the earthly logic or the devil's logic and saying, this is the way forward. Come, Jesus, makes sense. This is going to be good. It's going to be comfortable. It's going to be okay. You know, for once, and I guess that's the point, for once we can be the top dogs. But the problem with the violence and that kind of approach is that you're always just the next one who's about to get knocked off. You're just the next one in a long line who's going to be replaced. And Jesus is telling them and teaching them that actually the way forward is this way of non-violence and justice, a justice of fairness to all people. Yeah. What else did you see and notice in that passage?
Without being able to see the end from the beginning,
Yeah.
It's obvious that the disciples are going to say, you can't be killed because that was the end of our project.
It makes so much sense. You can't fault them on that, can you, Anne?
No. Can I ask a question which is really exercising me? You encourage us to stick to the text.
Mm.
You encourage us not to cross gospel. However, you can just say you're not answering this question if you like.
I might.
It's about Matthew.
Okay, ask the question.
When Peter says in Matthew's gospel, you are the Christ, Jesus says, that's great, Peter. I will build my church on that. And you will be top dog in the church.
Yeah. You're right. I'm not going to answer it now. Sorry. If you want to bring it to tomorrow at 12 o'clock, we can talk it through then.
Yes.
But I'm not going to go there now. Yeah. But what you've identified is quite right. That actually the story as it is in Matthew with a few slight edits is really quite different to the story as it is in Mark before those edits. Yeah. Anything else?
I suppose Jesus is saying now it's going to be a very hard road now, not an easy road. The rest of the chapter of quite a lot of trials and tribulations.
Right. Yeah.
And the other thing is that if Peter's looking back, he's probably looking back to King David's empire and also to Solomon. And Daniel is very clear that all empires fall. And the other thing is that Jesus is probably feeling the extreme pain of his remembered battle with Satan when he was doing the temptations and when he took him up on the top of the mountain and said, you know, all this could be yours. So I think I can understand where Peter's coming from, because if you desired something like the glories of Solomon, then to have somebody who's actually doing something completely different and telling you to get behind him, then it must have been quite hurtful.
So it's actually, I mean, you've brought that out quite nicely, Dorothy, because it's not just, this isn't just, you know, Jesus and Satan having an academic argument one day 2,000 years ago. Actually, this is embedded in the whole of our history. Throughout history, there is this battle between, is the way forward the way of dominance and violence, or is the way forward the way of justice, non-violence, and peace? And really, honestly, the world has never really tried the way of justice and non-violence and peace, except in a few odd places. But we have this massive history that shows that actually dominating and oppressing people doesn't keep them down and doesn't keep you on top. It just means you're on top for a while until things change. And whether it was Nazi Germany or apartheid South Africa or the Roman Empire, or I mean, just add whatever groups you wanted to that list, oppressive systems come down because we have a God of history who works and acts in history and isn't turning a blind eye to injustice. There hasn't been an empire or a structure like that. Ancient Egypt was so strong and so powerful for so long. Even our economic system is faltering because it's built on a system of oppression. And we think capitalism will last forever. The one thing I can promise you for sure, I don't know when it's going to end or how it's going to change or what the new thing will be, but it's too unfair to last. my God of justice will make sure that it changes. And that's been the story through history. And so at some point in that history, here are the protagonists in the story, Jesus and the devil standing together and having this, it's Peter, isn't it? But it's really Jesus and the devil having this interaction, this battle, if you like, and saying which way is going to dominate, which way is going to be shown to be the truth. And Peter's saying, well, it clearly can't be the way of nonviolence because you end up dead, Jesus. And clearly the way of dominance, if we're going to end up being on top, that sounds pretty cool. And we like that, Jesus. And Jesus is saying, now, whatever the cost and whatever the way is and however the path looks ahead, this is the right path. And it is the only path that is going to lead us to a world of justice and peace and, well, to the kingdom of God. Does that make sense?
Yep.
That's the big macro battle that Mark has represented for us in this little story. And it's right that it comes at this turning point in the story, this halfway point, because not just for Peter, not just for those disciples, but for each one of us, here is the question. Which side are you backing? Which side are you on? Not just in the abstract, but when you go and spend your money, or when you put your vote in the ballot box, or when you choose how you're going to do something, all of those things are making a choice one way or the other. And I'm sorry, but it doesn't get easier because, did we read that for? Jesus says to him, yeah, we did. This is Jesus' altar call. It's not quite as appealing as you might have heard in church a few times, because Jesus' altar call sounds like this. If you want to become my followers, deny yourselves, take up your cross, and follow me. For those who want to save their life will lose it, and those who lose their life for my sake and for the sake of the gospel will save it. What's it going to profit them to gain everything, to be as rich as anything, gain the whole world if they lose their life? Indeed, what would you be able to give in return for your life? Gosh, it's very hard, Jesus. I mean, that's quite tough. It's not... I mean, even when he says take up, what are the words? Take up their cross. I mean, we hear that in a very sanitized sense, but for first century people living in the Roman Empire, it only meant one thing. It meant that you had been too outspoken about the injustices of the Roman Empire, and they had decided to shut you up for good. And they were going to do that by publicly torturing you to death.
What can I do about this then?
I don't know.
Tough. Roy's asked a great question. So is in this context, is there anything in the fact that they're going to the imperial town of Caesarea Philippi? Sorry, it wasn't the question. I thought you were asking it first. Yes, absolutely. So Caesarea Philippi is an imperial town. It's named after, should be obvious from the name, but I'm trying to think who that was. It's named after one of the Roman top dogs. It's one of the centers of power, and it's in that context. And remember, the Romans were very, very quick to describe their Caesars, certainly in Jesus' era, as being son of God or even God in some cases. So it's in that environment that Jesus turns to his disciples and says, "Who do you say that I am?" It's in that environment that question is asked. Caesarea Philippi was also, I thought this was what you were going to ask, Caesarea Philippi was also by chance probably related, was a center for many different religions. So there was a place there which had traditionally been a worship center for the Baal and the worship of Baal. There was a center there which had been a time of worship center for worshiping Pan and so on. And probably all of those religious centers, because it was a center of power. But of course, it does illuminate that whole question when Jesus turns to his disciples and says, "So who do you say I am?" Any other thoughts? Shall we go on? Mark chapter 9, from verse 2. 6 days later, remember, I'm going to ask you the usual questions. What do you see? What is unusual? What does it sound like Mark is saying? 6 days later, Jesus took with him Peter and James and John and led them up a high mountain apart by themselves. And he was transfigured before them, and his clothes became dazzling white, such as no one on earth could bleach them. And there appeared to them Elijah with Moses, who were talking with Jesus. And Peter said to Jesus, "Rabbi, it's good for us to be here. Let us make 3 dwellings, one for you, one for Moses, one for Elijah." He didn't know what to say because they were terrified. And then a cloud overshadowed them. And from the cloud there came a voice, "This is my son, the beloved. Listen to him." And suddenly when they looked around, they saw no one with them anymore, but only Jesus. It is a beautiful piece of gospel writing. What do you see? What's unusual? What do you want to talk about?
They're being introduced into a different situation. Jesus, the Messiah, has told them already that he is a different Messiah. And now in this situation, he's demonstrating to them even more how he has something which other people don't have, which makes him different.
It's interesting in Mark's Gospel, he's very specific. 6 days later, we don't have that sort of approach normally.
That's a great observation. Have I finished screen sharing? Can you see me?
No, you didn't screen share.
I didn't screen share. Oh, sorry. Yes. So what's unusual for until now, we just hear immediately, and all of a sudden we hear 6 days later. What's that about?
It's time to reflect.
Just to go back to the creation story.
Well, that's an interesting observation.
Yeah.
Why might it be that? In a sense, might it be that there's a reference to the 6 days? In 6 days, God created the world. Is this about God recreating the world? Oh, I kind of like that. Yeah. I think there's another 6-day reference. I know there's another 6-day reference.
I think this is one of the most powerful parts of Mark. This part of it, I mean, you just take a congregation up that hill and see the transfiguration of Jesus, and it has you all in tears. It has you all completely mesmerized.
Right.
And I remember a lady saying to me out of my congregation, she said, "I was still there at night time." You know, it was so powerful.
It's hugely powerful. That's why I said, it's really well written gospel writing. So let's just unpack some of those images. So certainly one of the 6-day things in the Old Testament is when Moses is called up Mount Sinai to meet with God. Is that a suitable way of explaining it? He spends 6 days on the mountain and then is invited into the presence of God. Okay, so there might well be a little bit of that's happening. Just just bring that story to mind, because there's something about this that is happening. And Mark tells that it happened on what were those words? On a very high mountain?
Yep.
Yes, something like that. So again, it might bring to mind Sinai. It might bring to mind this idea of a cultural idea that you go up the mountain to meet with God. Those sort of things we're expecting to happen in the story. Yeah. What else do you notice in the story?
It's a beautiful example of where heaven and earth collide.
Yeah, okay. Where are the heaven and earth images that Mark is using in these words, in this passage? Who's there on the mountain? Yeah, sorry, go on.
On the mountain. And eventually the mountain of God is replaced by Jesus himself, because he becomes the source of worship and the place of worship, so that it's universal to everyone, not just upon a mountain top, because the mountains are replaced and become flattened. But
I hear what you're saying. I don't think that's where Mark is in this passage at the moment. Okay, yeah.
Surely it's Moses and Elijah.
Moses and Elijah. Who's Moses?
Moses, the lawgiver.
Mm-hmm.
Elijah, the chief prophet.
Absolutely.
All being gathered in Jesus.
Nice, John. So actually, who's meeting with Jesus?
The law and the prophets.
The law and the prophets. This is the cornerstone of our Jewish religion, isn't it? The law and the prophets. That's what's there. And they've come to meet, or there's this experience of them meeting with Jesus. And if we don't quite get it, I mean, what does transfiguration mean exactly? And what exactly is happening on the mountain? I'll tell you what I know, as little as Peter knows. Peter was just kind of like, let's build some shelters and stay here forever. And he didn't really know how to react to it either. Sorry, go on.
I think he was so overwhelmed. It was so new, such a fantastic experience. He didn't know what to make of it. He just hustled and bustled. He just didn't know what to do.
But we're in a similar space, aren't we, Liz? I mean, we can't really explain this except for the detergent advert in the middle where it says no one could wash them that white. Well, what's that about? Mark's just putting that there just to let you know that actually there is something supernatural happening here. That this is more than can be explained. Don't think because you can't explain it, you haven't understood it. There is more here than you could possibly explain.
I'm just thinking that, I'm just thinking of just simply about the Passover meal, where they have a chair ready for Elijah to return. And this is, here they see Elijah returning. So there is a significance, I think, here of the meaning, and with Moses as well. Just God is the God of the living, and not just the dead, and this expectation of a fulfillment was coming, and Jesus was there to talk with him.
Thank you, Danny.
We haven't talked about the those words, "This is my son, the beloved," which occurred first of all at baptism at the beginning. And now it's here again at the beginning of the second half.
Yeah.
Thank you, David. Yeah. So just before that, let me just point out that the disciples have this experience. What is their experience of it? Verse 6, they're terrified. Sometimes that is the appropriate reaction in the presence of God. Then a cloud overshadowed them, and they hear these words David reminded us of. They hear from the cloud, there came a voice. So this is, I think it's fair for us to say this is God speaking. They hear the voice of God speaking. That would fit with our understanding. And the voice says, "This is my son, the beloved." David rightly points out to us, this is the same voice saying the same thing that was heard at the baptism. This was this was the voice that said, not only is this the Son of God, but this is also the one who is working with God to straighten out the world. Does that make sense?
And the voice says something else.
It does. What else does the voice say, Paul?
The voice, and this is addressed, I think that this is my son, the beloved, is addressed to Jesus and to the disciples. And then the voice says, listen to him. Because,
who's that
of course, that's the disciples, because that's exactly what they don't do. Of course, they continue not to listen to him.
So the disciples are still perhaps having this argument, this conversation about, Son of Man is a good idea, but Messiah is a really good idea. I know Jesus says Son of Man, but maybe we should be going with this Messiah thing. And into the midst of that whole argument, which is only a few verses ago, a voice comes from heaven and says,
listen to
backing the wrong horse if you don't listen to Jesus. Eh? There's a voice settling the argument for once and for all. You can debate what you like about what is the best way forward for the world, whether we should be doing this or that or whatever. But in the end, in 9 verse 8, 7, the voice speaks from heaven and God says, listen to Jesus. I mean, that's got to settle the argument, doesn't it?
Except that before the end of this chapter, they're busy arguing about who's going to be the greatest and things. So they didn't really listen. That's the point, isn't it?
No. So perhaps, perhaps it's not talking to the disciples then, Paul.
Oh, I think it was talking to the disciples. I just think they didn't do it.
Who else might it be talking to?
Well, he's talking to everybody that reads this afterwards. He's talking to
Absolutely.
Mark's readers and hearers ad infinitum, isn't it?
Absolutely.
And we do exactly what the disciples did and don't listen to him either.
We've got 10 minutes left. I want to move to the next story because it attaches to this story quite well. And this time, right, I'm going to get my screen sharing. Oh gosh, not that. Screen sharing, right. You can see my screen now?
Yes, that's come up.
Thank you. So this immediately follows the transfiguration. There's no division in it, it's part of the same story. As they were coming down the mountain, that's Jesus, ordered them to tell no one about what they had seen until after the Son of Man had risen from the dead. So they kept the matter to themselves, but questioning what this rising from the dead could mean. Then they asked him, why do the scribes say that Elijah must come first? And he said to them, Elijah is indeed coming first to restore all things. How then is it written about the Son of Man that he's going to go through many sufferings and be treated with contempt? But I tell you that Elijah has come, and they did to him whatever they pleased, as it is written about him. I'm going to stop there quickly and just ask you quickly, what does he mean, Elijah has come?
John the Baptist.
John the Baptist, spot on. So John the Baptist dressed up like Elijah, John the Baptist in the footsteps of the great prophets. There he's come, he's told them about the ways, he's told them to come back to the right way of living, and they've done to him whatever they wanted. In the end, chopped off his head and thought they were done with him. Okay? So, verse 14. When they came to the disciples, because remember, it's only the few of them that went up the hill. When they came to the disciples, they saw a great crowd around them and some scribes arguing with them. And when the whole crowd saw him, Jesus, they were immediately overcome with awe, and they ran forward to greet him. He asked them, what are you arguing about with them? And someone from the crowd answered him, Teacher, I brought you my son. He has a spirit that makes him unable to speak. And whenever it seizes him, it dashes him down, and he foams and he grinds his teeth and he becomes rigid. And I asked your disciples to cast it out, but they couldn't do so. And he answered them, you faithless generation, how much longer must I be among you? How much longer must I put up with you? Bring him to me. And they brought the boy to him. And when the spirit saw him, immediately it threw the boy into convulsions, and he fell on the ground and he rolled about, foaming at the mouth. And Jesus asked the father, how long has this been happening to him? And he said, from childhood. It has often cast him into the fire and into the water to destroy him. But if you are able to do anything, have pity on us and help us. And Jesus said to him, if you are able, all things can be done for the one who believes. And immediately the father of the child cried out, I believe, help my unbelief. When Jesus saw that a crowd came running together, he rebuked the unclean spirit, saying to it, you spirit that keeps this boy from speaking and hearing, I command you, come out of him and never enter him again. After crying out and convulsing him terribly, it came out, and the boy was like a corpse, so that most of them said, he's dead. But Jesus took him by the hand and lifted him up, and he was able to stand. And when he entered the house, his disciples asked him privately, why could we not cast it out? And he said to them, this kind can come out only through prayer. Okay. Gospel writing, the genre is gospel. It's teaching us about Jesus. It's teaching about discipleship. It's teaching us about God and what it's going to mean to follow God. The boy doesn't have some medical condition that we would describe as epilepsy or anything else. Put your best gospel hats on and show me what you've learned so far, and ask the right questions about this passage. What do we see? What do we hear? What does it sound like is happening?
When the boy is finally convulsed, the crowd say he's dead. And Jesus says, no, he's not. When the disciples have been asking previously, what does this rising from the dead mean? Here's an example.
Okay, that's helpful. Thank you. What else?
Well, the disciples obviously didn't have enough faith.
Right.
I like the way that the crowd rushed towards Jesus when he came down, as if here's the answer coming.
Okay. Yeah, that's a nice image too. All right. Tell me about this boy.
Is Jesus testing the disciples again? Testing their faith?
Yeah, I hear you. I'm not sure that Jesus is explicitly testing them, but certainly Mark is contrasting the disciples with Jesus. Yeah.
Earlier on, Mark kept saying that Jesus lifts people up. He takes their hand and he lifts them up. The disciples hadn't even tried to lift him up.
Okay. And I mean that this Jairus' daughter, he intentionally takes her by the hand and puts her on her feet again. There's that kind of image that happens in the story. Remember chapter 2, I know it's ages ago, and we were in the synagogue with that demon, and we looked at the words in the passage, and we decided that this wasn't just an abstract kind of demon, that there were particular words that kept coming up over and over again, which kind of gave us a clue as to what the story was about. And what are the words that come up over and over again in the story?
Foamed at the mouth?
Even more often than that. I think that's twice, you're right, but even more often than that. 5 or 6 times, if I'm right.
Possessed by a spirit?
More than that. Just one word.
Just boy?
No.
No.
You believe.
Believe, yes. Believe and faith comes up over and over again. The father at the end is saying something. What does he say? Something like, I do believe. I'm trying to believe. I want to believe. help me in my unbelief. I'm trying to make this journey from not believing to believing. And within it, within the story, there's a whole lot of conversations about faith. I don't want to run over time, so I'm just going to tell you some stuff, and we can talk about it a little bit, and we can react, and we can talk about it tomorrow, or we can come back to it next week. Immerse yourself in the story and just tell me, what is your impression of this boy when you first meet him? What is his problem? Is he not rigid, and he doesn't listen, and he doesn't hear, and he doesn't speak? Is it not possibly a description of what some people are like before they meet Jesus, or in their least best state? And isn't it possible that actually the devil is trying to keep people there? Mm-hmm. And actually, when he is released from that, he is no longer rigid and thrown down and kept down and grinding his teeth and whatever the rest of the description is, and somehow he is raised. Well, he's raised to a new way of living, isn't he? And even as he's raised to that new way of living, it is so different from what has gone before that the people who knew him before can't even recognize him. They think he's dead. He's so different that they cannot recognize him as the same person. That person that was before, the rigid, held down person is almost like dead. And Jesus, I love it there. Somewhere it says, but Jesus. I thought that could make a whole sermon on its own. So often in our lives, that's the two words. The whole world seems to be moving in one direction. But Jesus took him by the hand, lifted him up, and listen, this boy who was always held down and rigid and all those other things was able to stand. How long had that boy been like that?
Since childhood.
Since childhood. In fact, his whole of his culture had raised him in a certain way, expected him and taught him to behave in a certain way. And only Jesus was able to help him to make a transition to a new way of living. Even the disciples couldn't do it. In fact, the only real power to make that transition from an old way of living that is so familiar that we've been taught all our lives to this new way that Jesus is wanting us to live, in which we know there's hope and peace and justice and fulfillment. The only way that you can really make that transition is through
Jesus.
Jesus or
faith.
Jesus and
Faith.
Stick to the text.
Prayer.
Prayer. Prayer. Actually, Jesus says here, the important transition that needs to happen is you need to keep putting yourself into the presence of God, into the presence of everything that's godly, and allowing those things to rub off on you and transform you. All your life, capitalism and whatever else has been telling you this is the way to behave. You've got to give these other values the opportunity to embed themselves in your life. And in Jesus' words, that change will only happen through prayer. I'm 3 minutes over.
Helen says, as the boy is being thrown about by the evil spirit and being destroyed, it's like the four beasts in Daniel. Yeah.
It is. It's that same sort of violent image, the same sort of debate between what is happening is Is it this violent way of the world, or is it Jesus' new way lifting this boy to life? Yeah. Thank you, Helen. The boy becomes still. He is at peace. They think he's dead because he's so different to what was before. But Jesus lifts him up in peace, and close to the text, I love it, he stands restored. Can I close in prayer?
Yep. Yes.
I know I've given you a whole lot to think about. I'd encourage you, James, are you able to just put in the chat the Zoom thing for tomorrow? Or Tricia, do people have it?
Do you have that to hand, Tricia?
Before you go, it will be in the chat, even if I've got to do it. And so if you want to come at 12 o'clock tomorrow, we'll have a more of a free form discussion space. Otherwise, we'll be back again next Thursday, 7 o'clock, running with Mark's Gospel. Let's pray. Gracious God, continue to open our eyes. Gracious God, come and help us to hear. Gracious God, come and take us by the hand, raise us to life, put us on our feet, and help us to live and walk and dance and work with you to the glory of your name. Amen.
Thank you.
Thank you, Adrian.
Yeah, thank you. If you hang on just a moment.
Yeah, I'm just putting it in now, Adrian.
You got it. Okay, thanks.
Yeah.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Adrian.
Thank you.
See you next week.
Bye.
Thank you. God bless.
Bye.
Good evening.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you.
Thank you, Adrian.
12 o'clock tomorrow, Adrian.
12 o'clock, yeah.
Yep, it's going to go in the chat now.
Okay, there's the link in the chat if you don't have it. Otherwise, email Tricia or myself.
Okay.
Stream's ended.